Hi, I'm Lynn Langett, and here's part 2 of learning GitHub. In the first part, I talked about what GitHub was and why you should use it. So if you're totally unfamiliar, you might want to watch that. In this part, we're going to start working with it. So we're going to create an account, a repository. We're going to select and set up a GitHub client, and then we're going to just do a bit of work with repositories. So let's start by thinking about you. So when you work with GitHub, you're going to need to create an account, and you'll have a username and a password. You can also set account properties such as your email contact address, your location, if you want to. They're optional, and your picture. I'll show you that. And then you may be part of a team or an organization. So let's actually just jump out and take a look at what this looks like. And when you start, you're going to work from the website. So you might remember that that's just github.com. So from the main site, you're going to need to pick a username. So I'm going to just pick a unique one here. And you can see this is a new name, and then I'm going to need to supply some sort of email. Actually, let's do this so I can remember it. All right, and then I'm going to put a password in. So I'm actually just going to go out of here and put my correct username in, and I'm going to click sign in, and there I'm going to go ahead and sign in. So once you validate your email, that's what you'll get. And I'm going to sign in. But I'm just going to go over to my username here and just show you a couple things about my username. So if I go to the settings, you can see that I've got a profile here, profile information, and I can say if I'm available for hire. That's kind of cool. You put your picture, and then you have account settings, your email, how you're going to get notified, how you're paying, your SSH keys, which repositories you are part of, and which organizations. Now here I'm part of an organization for my nonprofit, Teaching Kids Programming. This is optional. You can just be a solo person on GitHub. And you can see I have a picture there. And again, this is information about the organization. I've got 4 people on this organization. And you want to fill all this stuff in if possible, because it makes it easier for people to find your information. You have billing, applications, and then webhooks. And you can see you set permissions on this through Teams. So it's pretty simple interface. And you don't have to fill out, the picture or anything, but it's a nice thing to do. And see, I've chosen to put my location, generally an email contact address, and then I do have a couple of organizations. Now, if I go over and look at the organizations, you can create an organization or be a member of one. And this is a little bit more advanced, but some of you might want to do this for a coding club or something. You can see here's the Teaching Kids Programming, and here's the GitHub address. So it's kind of nice for all of our different code. And then we've got some different code repositories here for the kids. And then just to show you another one, I'm part of the Google Developer Experts. And I don't own this one. I'm just part of this. I'm some of the people here. So I got invited to participate. So this just shows the list, and see some of the people are private and some of the people are public, which you can choose to be. There's 59 people here. So you want to think about when you're contributing to these repositories or setting them up, do you want to just be on your own? Is there a group that you want to set up? This is a group that of kids that I coded with in Sweden. And this is a piece of contact information. Again, all this stuff is editable. So you want to, think how findable you want to be, basically. And remember, all these repositories are public unless you pay GitHub to get a private repository. That's an important thing. So if you have some code that you need to keep private, then you have to, pay GitHub for that. Of course, the primary reason we're using GitHub is to store your code. So code is stored in a repository, which is like a very, very, very fancy folder. So, and of course you can have subcontainers inside of it. So that's not exactly a one-for-one comparison, but maybe like a drive, like on your hard drive. It's a container for files. So you want to use good naming conventions so that you and other people can find not only your repository, but the items in it. And then you want to set the repository properties. And I talked about private repositories, but I'll show you what they look like basically. So let me go back in, and you can see that I work with these different repositories. So let me just show you an example. So here's some sample code that I wrote for an application, and you can see I described what it is. You can see the type of code it is. This is if it's been forked or branched, forked actually, and I'll explain that in a subsequent video. It just means split off, basically. Shows when it's been updated, and then if you click on it, and you click right here, you can see metadata about it. So again, here's my name, and then I can edit this, being the owner. And then this shows the activity around it. So this is just me, basically. And this shows the language. This shows the files that are in it. And of course, you can go all the way through it and look at the files. As I mentioned in the first video, the purpose of using source control rather than just like a Dropbox or something is you have a number of groups of commits. And you can see here's the commit and it's ID'd. And you can go and you can look at the commit. And of course you could look at what was changed from a previous commit and you could roll back. So it's a perpetual undo, if you will. That's allowed not only for you, but for the other people that are contributing with you. Now, the way that this works in terms of committing is the owner of the repository is the first committer. And then, of course, you're going to set the permissions. Because you might be wondering, well, if I put this up here, can somebody erase it or wipe it out or something like that? No, you've got all the permissions. You know, you have to set the permissions appropriately. And, of course, just like when we set on the user, you're going to set for the repository on the settings for the repository. So if I click on the settings, you can see, again, it's got a nice, consistent interface where we have the name, we have who are the collaborators, and you can see I don't have any collaborators. If I wanted to have a collaborator, they'd have to be a member of GitHub, and then I would add them. Collaborators have full access here. So there's different ways to work with people, and collaborators do have the ability to make any change. So as we learn more about how GitHub works, you may not want to make everybody a collaborator. There's other ways to work with people. All right, so now I'm up at the level of my repositories, and you might say, well, how do you make one of these things? Because if you look on this page, it's not obvious. So if you click right here, you can see you can make a new repository or a new organization. So organization we just covered, it's a group of people collaborating together. If you want to make a new repository, you just click here. So here, if you're a member of more than one group, as I am, you can see that they want to say, to which group do you want this repository to belong? When you first start, it's probably just going to be you. But let's say, you're a group of students coding or something like that, like these guys are. You might want to put this in you guys' group, if you will. And then you make a unique repository name. And I'm going to call this one YouTube demo. All right, it has to be unique. All right, and then I'm going to say description. So test repo for YouTube series. Okay, and then public, and I'd only get private if I paid for this. And then initialize this repository with a README. So the way the README files work is they're written in a language called Markdown or .md. And as we make this, you'll see how it works. So also it says this will allow you to git clone the repository immediately. Skip this step if you've already run git init locally. Now this is where we're starting to get a little bit of the complexity of GitHub. We're working up on this website, it's public, but it's talking about running locally. And one of the things as we work with it that you want to remind yourself over and over is there's two ways to work with GitHub. One is on the website and one is on your machine through a piece of software that will interact with this website. So we're going to initialize this so we can do git clone, and then we have the option to add this file called git ignore. And if we click down here, what we can do is we can say what type of files we want not to be included in our repository for the different languages. This seems, a little advanced, so we don't have to add this right now. But the idea is if you have some configuration files, maybe you're working with another developer and they have some security, settings or something in their configuration file to connect to a database or a cloud service, and you don't want to put those in the repository. You just want the business logic code, for example. You would add a git ignore. And we'll do that later on, but I'm just not going to do it right now. The other thing is to add a license. Now this can be really confusing when you're first starting. So I recommend if you've never looked at open source licenses, if you've only worked, for example, for commercial software or something, that you actually go to the site and you look at it, because you're going to see in here, and if you've never seen these before, it's not going to make a lot of sense. But you do want to know what are the terms of the license, because you're putting your intellectual property up onto the public internet here, and you want to make sure you understand what are the legal requirements around that. So take a minute, pause the video if you want to, go and read this. For this purposes, I'm going to put Apache License 2.0. And then I'm going to create this repository. And you can see there it is. So a little blank repository. Here's the URL. There's the metadata, if you will. And I have two files in here. I have the license that I just selected, and I have the README. Now let's try to understand the relationship between what we see in this list and what we can do up on the website and what we're going to need a client for. So the README is a markdown syntax. So if I go into the README right now, it made it automatically. I can go and click the little pencil here, and what it's going to do, it's going to give it to me in this markdown language. Now you can use an offline markdown editor because it formats based on characters. So certain characters have certain meanings, like asterisks and exclamation points and that kind of stuff. And if you want to have any sort of nice formatting here, you're probably going to do this offline. But I'm just going to show you. Hello from my screencast. You can actually just type right in here if you want to, and then you're actually making a change. Now here's a core concept in GitHub. In the sort of non-source control world, we're used to saving a file. And in the source control world, we're going to commit our file. So added some more info, and I should probably write something better. And then you could write something longer, blah, 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 if you want to. And we'll talk more about what you might write later on, and then commit changes. Now notice inside of here, you can look at history. So what is this? So here's where we start to see how this is different than like a Dropbox or a box or some sort of just simple file sharing. This is a location where you're going to save, files that have changes, but it's really designed to be able to look at those files and to revert back. You see how they have numbers, and you can see if I go back into it, this is what's changed, and it shows green for added. So it's very, very granular. And the reason for this, of course, is when you're writing code in a collaborative environment, you might make some, hideous mistake. You might want to go back to a previous version. So now inside of here, you might see there's a little tab over here. So here's the code tab. Over here we have issues. And what this is this is an area that you can list down problems or bugs in your code, feature requests. So if we want to create an issue, we just click right here and we say, please write some code, because I really don't have any code in here. And then I can assign this to somebody. Now, of course, I can only assign it to me because I'm the only person here. This is why you might use an organization. And you can put images in here if you want to. And notice we always can work with Markdown. So I can say, please write some code as soon as possible. All right. And I'm kind of making a joke here that this is a bug, that I have no code in my repository. So I'm going to submit this as an issue. Okay. So now I have this as an issue. So again, you can get all kinds of fancy stuff for collaborative work. And indeed, as I said in my first video, lots of, big software companies like the Microsofts and the Googles will work collaboratively using, source control repositories like GitHub. And notice you can subscribe to notifications, so you can see, like if you post a bug, when somebody, or a feature request, when somebody responds to that. So it's a method of communicating with developer teams. So if we go back to the top level, you can see now we've got this initial file. Now the question might be next, well, I wrote some documentation here. How do I actually write code? So to write some code, you're going to need some kind of editor. And I guess you could be hardcore and use Vim or Notepad or something, but I don't use that. And then you either are going to integrate into your editor a local client that communicates to GitHub. Which, if it's a command line, is called Git, and if it is a graphical user interface, it's some kind of interface to GitHub. And you can either have the connection on your machine to GitHub be a separate thing, so terminal window at the simplest, or a separate program, or you can put it in your development environment where you write your code. And I think this is probably easier to understand by demo, so let me actually show you what this looks like. So I've got this virtual machine. Inside of here I have good old Eclipse. So I've got some Java here in a project. It's my kids project where we have this code listed on a public repository, and I'll show you what it looks like. So here's our Teaching Kids Programming. So here is the actual code that I'm working on. But there's really no connection between this repository and what I'm doing in Eclipse by default. So there's a couple different ways that I could take my code, which is sitting on my local machine, and send it back and forth up to GitHub. So if I go into the properties, you can see that this is physically where this is on my machine right here. So if I copy this, I go right here, I go right here, then this is this basically. So inside of here, there are my Java files. So they physically are sitting on my machine. So that's called my workspace in this particular client. So how do I get these files up to GitHub then? What's the connection? Well, I could use the command line, and I rarely use it. So I'll just open it up because I use a graphical tool, but I'll just start with that. So if I type git, I'm going to actually cheat, and I'm going to open up my Mac where I have it set. And if I type git, I know this is a little confusing, so go to Mac terminal window here. The reason for this, I didn't put it in the path because I don't even use it. So here's a bunch of commands to interact with a GitHub repository. And I will actually cover these in a subsequent video, but I think it's a really hard way to start. So I don't recommend doing this. What rather I recommend that you do is you get, in this case, GitHub for Windows, which is free. GitHub for Windows. And there's one version for the Mac as well. So you just download this, and then what it looks like, I've got it open here, is this. It's a little program that runs on your Windows machine, and basically you go inside of it here, and you can either create a new repository here and then push it up, or you can do what's called cloning. Now, and I'm going to come back to that in just a second, but once you have that, you can see I was working in my Eclipse in this directory, and if I say view on Explorer, there's where I was right there from Eclipse. So what I did is when I went to go and work inside of here, I had this code up here, and I pulled it down into Eclipse, well, really onto my hard drive first, using this add. And what I did is I created a clone of one of my repositories. And by creating a clone, I then made a local copy, which literally copied the files onto my desktop in the location that I said to put them. And then once I did that, then I set my workspace in my IDE to open to that location. Got all that? It's kind of crazy, huh? So I think this method of working outside of your IDE is hard. And so I actually have a new IDE to show you guys that I'm starting to work with. And it's called CodeEnvy. So this IDE is a developer environment as a service. And you can try it for free. It's a shared tenancy. And you can even save your environment. The way they make money is with a premium model where you have higher amounts of basically hardware resources. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you this because it's kind of neat. So notice when I sign in, I can sign in with my GitHub account, which is kind of cool. So to be clear, in my case, this would be a replacement for Eclipse. So if I said import a project, I can import a project, and it's all web-based from GitHub, so long as I'm authenticated there. So if I go out to GitHub and I say, okay, I want this YouTube demo, it's going to be kind of boring because I don't have too much going on there. And I paste this in. So I've got my YouTube demo, and I'm going to click import. And so I'm just going to configure this as a blank project type for right now. And I'm not going to bother with the runner because I don't need to run it. So inside of here, I can now add a file. So I can add a new file, and let me just add, I don't care, I'll add a CSS file. So I'll call this styles. All right, now if I go to Git, I have an entire menu here. I don't have to work with the separate client. And now you can see the Git URL right here. And then when you're ready to work with it, it's right inside of here. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So let me go back. So we took a very quick look at the fact there was a Git command line. I'll look at it more in the next video. And I mentioned that we can use the standalone GitHub for Windows or GitHub for Mac, or integrate it into the IDE. Now, just to be complete on that, in addition to using GitHub for Windows like you can here, another thing that you can do is you can get an integrated piece inside of a lot of the IDEs. So by default in Eclipse it's not there, nor is it in Visual Studio for GitHub, although in some of the newer environments like I was showing, like CodeNB, it's built in. So now that you've got your client, you've made your repository, you need to clone your repository. And we actually kind of got ahead of ourselves, because in this working with CodeNB, when I was connecting to the repository, it cloned it automatically. But again, this is clone means I pulls it in so I can work with it. Before I get off this point though, I just want to show you inside of my repository that we have some different options over here around clone, and this really confuses people, so I want to take a minute to talk about it. So first of all, you have HTTPS clone URL, and you can copy it right here. And what do you get on that? You basically get this information right here. If you go to clone in desktop, you basically get the same command as this. And what the heck do you get if you get download zip? So what this does is it gives you a zip file of these two files. So let me actually just show you the difference. You can see literally this is a zip file of these two files, versus if I click clone in desktop. So what happened when I clicked that button is it opened up my GitHub for the Mac and it loaded the project. So you might wonder what this is, HTTPS, SSH, or Subversion. Subversion is another source control system that people are still using. So it's a way that you would connect to this repository and pull it down to a Subversion client. And then these are other types of terminal type of clients. Most usually when you're cloning your repository, what you're doing is from GitHub, you are making a complete copy of a repository onto a local folder so that you can then connect to that copy and then work with a code editor. Now, why would you want to use a zip file? Well, you don't use it very often. You might want to use it just for portability, to put the code on like a USB drive or something like that. So in this screencast, we took a look at getting started and setting up repositories. In the next one, we're going to look at working with those repositories and working with commits. So this is Lynn Langit. Commit yourself and have a great day.